So looking at our agenda, our schedule of activities, we survived the morning. How about that? So we are on topic presentation number 3. After we ordained our pastors, then where do you place them? Pastoral placement, and representing the Convention of Philippine Baptist Churches is Reverend Dr. Gerson Narciso, and will be followed by Reverend Dr. Elmo Familiaran for ABCUSA.
A pleasant afternoon to one and all. 1 to 2:30 session is always considered graveyard session here at Central Philippine University. And so Dr. Elmo Familiaran and I are having a little problem because we are afraid that our inputs might just drive you to sleep. And so let me start off by with a story which I hope would perk up your spirit and keep you alive, alert, and awake all throughout our presentations. I'd like to start with a story about a group of people who were attending an international religious conference. One of them was a German, another guy was an American, an Arab, and then a Jew. They were engaged in a heated argument as to what really is the official language in heaven. The German guy stood up and insisted strongly that the official language in heaven is German. After all, he said, I don't have to tell you that most of the well-known theologians in our time are German, so I believe that the official language in heaven is German. Then the American guy stood up and strongly insisted, I believe it is English. Maybe I don't have to tell you that English is our international language. And then the Arab guy also stood up and he said, I believe that the official language in heaven is Arabic, because the Al-Quran was written in Arabic. And then the Jew also stood up and insisted that the official language is Aramaic. After all, he said Jesus spoke Aramaic. And in the middle of their argument, Jesus appeared from nowhere and said, Maayong hapon. So, I think that is a very nice way of telling you that the official language in heaven is our language. Well, I am happy for this wonderful privilege to share some of my thoughts on the topic, pastoral placement, particularly from within the context of the Convention of Philippine Baptist Churches. Yes, I am very optimistic that through this time of engagement, sharing, and reflection, we would be all the more enriched and equipped by our varied and unique experiences as we respond to local, national, and global issues that confront the church today. Well, I am an avid believer of the Beatitude that says, blessed is he who speaks short, for he shall be given more time to speak. So I'll try to make this presentation as short as I can. And since I don't have the luxury of time to read and explain everything here in details, allow me to just highlight the most important points that I need to share in this paper. I have requested the youngest member of our CPBC board, Pastor Joshua Zunita, to manage my PowerPoint. I don't know how to prepare PowerPoint, but I know how to point. So, where are you, Pastor Joshua? Part of the core mission principle of CPBC is to see every pastor exhibiting deep commitment to the implementation of a holistic and comprehensive ministry engaging in dynamic prophetic and priestly function, building a community that heals and restores broken ties, developing strong and responsible leadership, persevering in ministry, promoting godly image, authority, excellence, and integrity, developing a healthy church, and leading in community transformation. That is found in the CPBC promotional booklet that was printed and circulated long time ago to our local churches. Now, to realize this vision, the CPBC seeks to initiate a continuing theological education and ministerial concerns program that is geared toward the development of a breed of pastors who are academically, morally, and spiritually competent and passionate in doing dynamic pastoral and ministerial tasks, and produce equipped pastors who carefully handle the word of truth. While the above vision appears lofty and noble, experience seems to suggest that it does not match fairly well with realities on the ground. For many decades now, the leadership of our convention has been haunted with nagging questions and problems concerning the plights of our pastors, especially in the area of continuing theological education and pastoral placement. Yes, we have been addressing a lot of these issues before, but the CPBC seems to have not done enough. I'd like to change the word failed in coming up with well-defined strategies and sustainable programs to see to it that the needs of our pastors are properly and consistently addressed. The problem of churchless pastors and pastorless churches in particular is hanging around for years, calling for a decisive action and resolution. Still, our convention has to deal with recurring questions of why do we have churchless pastors, or why do some of our pastors leave the church? I believe these questions require serious attention and great care, for indeed they have important implications to our churches and our convention. We need to bear in mind that every time a pastor abandons his congregation for whatever reason, the pastoral vocation of all of us and the whole witness of our convention is vitiated and jeopardized. Viable solutions to this problem must be explored, but finding remedies to this problem requires some degree of knowledge and critical analysis of the causes or factors that might have contributed to this problem. And so let me share with you some factors that affect this problem of churchless pastors and pastorless churches in the context of our convention. Well, there could be numerous and varied reasons why some pastors are churchless and why some of our pastors are leaving the church. But based on my personal observation, being a pastor myself for about 30 years now, and from insights gained through numerous interactions and exchanges with colleagues and church leaders in our convention, the following factors stand out. Number one, we have a theological problem. Our problem is posed by the fact that very often our theological definition of pastoral ministry tend to be idealized descriptions of what ministry should be at its best, a standard that only a few, if any, could achieve. Wise and Smith rightly observed that while this perfectionist definition of shepherding reflects the unique character and special intensity of the call to ministry, and while it poses a challenge to better and excellent performance in pastoral work, it can also be deeply troubling when pastors are also keenly aware of their human limitations. This idealized perfectionist standard, if imposed, could make some pastors so insecure about themselves and cause many to wonder whether they are up to the job or have mistaken their calling. One of the reasons for churchless pastors could be the stressful expectations set by the congregation towards the personality of the pastor who should work with them. The theology of perfectionism, held by many, is dangerous because it can drive pastors to overwork, mental and emotional fatigue, and in extreme cases, to psychological breakdown and withdrawal from ministry. Perfectionism can also make parishioners hypercritical, over-demanding, and unforgiving rather than gracious, kind, and forgiving. The second problem that we have identified is what we call vocational identity crisis. The crisis confronting humanity today is more complex than merely a change in social structures, politics, and economy. The globalizing world brings about significant changes in the way people think about the work and how they make sense of who they are and what they do. In fact, it is appropriate to say that these changes have resulted to a crisis of meaning and significance in relation to how people think of their work, relationships, and identity. And in the process, many people are confused and began to lose a sense of what their work and actions mean, and ultimately what their lives mean. This is also true in the context of pastoral life. There are distractions and forces around that affect the way pastors think of themselves, their sacred calling, and what they do. And in a very complex and fast-changing world, they can also get confused and sidetracked from the very purpose of their calling and as ministers of the gospel. Problems arise when the pastor has not come to terms with his or her vocation, or when he or she is not clear and at peace with what it is he or she is called to do. Thus, it is important for the pastor to be true to himself or herself and understand fully the nature and depth of his or her pastoral calling and ministry. To be true to oneself, and Smith suggests, is not only a matter of personal desire, but also a moral imperative. To live in truth is to be true to who we are. And so being fully aware of the nature and depth of their pastoral vocation and the work they are called to do will help pastors avoid the temptation of being distracted and lured by attractive offers that might cause them to compromise and abandon their sacred calling. It will also save them from unnecessary and unfocused activities which in themselves have little meaning or purpose. Many pastors leave their churches for lack of meaning and purpose. We call that vocational identity crisis. And then the third problem that we have identified is the absence of institutionalized support system. Pastoral work is a complicated thing. I hope you will all agree with that. The character and skills that make pastoral ministry a success do not come so easily as our young graduates go into the field from the seminary. And so, new entrants into the ministry need the support of those who are already there in the field for mentoring and encouragement. But the irony is, there seems to be no one there who could lend such expected support. Our young pastors do not know where to go to seek for advice when problems crop up in the ministry. In reality, they are left alone to survive amidst enormous challenges and difficulties involved in the ministry. Just like any other profession, pastors experience failures, setbacks, and disappointments. They do their work to the best of their ability, but they are not deemed to have done it well enough. Others face criticisms or inadequate affirmation and support, leaving them heartbroken as though the wind is taken out of their sails. Others in pastoral ministry have come to a realization in midlife that congregations are changing rapidly, especially in the way they are governed and in the qualities they seek in a pastor. I think one very painful and devastating feeling that pastors may have is the feeling that they have been pushed out. And that pain can strike at the heart of their confidence. This situation shatters their sense of competence, even their confidence that they can do any job at all. It gives them the sad impression that the only solution at hand is to quit from the job. Personally, I know of some pastors who left their churches after experiencing failures and traumatic experiences in the workplace. This happened to Peter, the most aggressive and outspoken among the 12. After realizing his demoralizing and humiliating failures, he came back to his old and ordinary occupation. Joshua Zonita, who happens to be the youngest member of our CPBC board, is here managing my PowerPoint. In his article entitled Into the Deep, Rediscovering the Nature and Depth of Pastoral Life, he points out that the psychology of Peter is common to many pastors who in one way or the other have failed along the way. Their tendency is to go back to the old ways when the new set of pathways seem unworkable and unattainable. Again, in his book, The Way of the Heart, Desert, Spirituality, and Ministry, Henry Nouwen observes that there are many symptoms of physical, emotional, moral, and spiritual fatigue among pastors today. He states, it is not difficult to see that in this fearful and painful period of our history, we who minister in parishes, schools, universities, hospitals, and prisons are having a difficult time fulfilling our task of making the lights of Christ shine into darkness. Many of us have adapted ourselves too well to the general mood of lethargy. Others among us have become tired, exhausted, disappointed, bitter, resentful, or simply bored. Using the analogy of the call of Jonah, Eugene Peterson observes that many churches today have become Nineveh-like places for many pastors that must be avoided. And many pastors are lined up at the Joppa agency to buy tickets for Tarshish. He points out further that in other cases, some churches vomit their pastors like the big fish that swallowed Jonah when they could not stomach them anymore. And then fourth, economic problem. Pastors receiving very low salary or honorarium has been a perennial problem here in the Philippines. This malady is aggravated by increasing economic demands brought about by globalization. Prices of prime commodities are constantly increasing while pastors' salary stay at the bottom. At one time, one pastor told me, you know what? My church member said, Pastor, you have the highest calling. And I said, what did you say? Well, I affirmed that. I said, yes, I have the highest calling, but my salary is low. So pastors are caught up in the clash between job demands and personal commitments to family and financial concerns. They wonder whether personal and family commitments are legitimate ethical concerns or should they be overridden by the demands of their calling. If they are to maintain faithful and committed both to their pastoral ministry and family commitments, where are they supposed to strike the balance? These are realities, or these are realistic, ethical, and moral considerations that our pastors need to tackle. But be that as it may, decision, no matter how moral or ethical, has economy. The economic condition of ministers, at some degree, has influence to their decision. Number 5, and this is what I would like to emphasize in this presentation, we have a serious structural problem. For many years now, the practice of calling a pastor is determined largely by our local churches based on their respective policies and leadership. The CPBC headquarters only serve as information center for the congregations. The most that the CPBC leadership can do is to recommend available pastors to our churches. The final say, however, lies in the hand of local church leaders. They can employ and terminate pastors anytime without any coordination with the CPBC and CDMA leadership. Yes, I still have 10 minutes. Until now, the CPBC does not have a comprehensive, functional, and sustainable pastoral placement program to efficiently facilitate the assignment of pastors to our churches. The absence of this mechanism makes it difficult for CPBC pastors to look for a church. Local churches, on the other hand, are also having a hard time looking for pastors who can work with them. Some churches are forced to call pastors coming from other denominations, which often result to two serious problems. In the past, several attempts have already been made to address this lingering problem. For example, the CBMA, through the initiative of its former national president, the Reverend Dr. Edwin Larissa, had organized a pastors placement program to coordinate and facilitate placement of pastors to our churches. However, due to constant and quick succession of leadership and the absence of full-time personnel, the program was terminated. Again, in one of the CPBC strategic planning last 3 years ago, which gave focus on the pivotal role pastors play as key leaders of our churches, a proposal was presented to create a pastors' care committee in the provincial CBMA level, whose primary role is to look into the situations and needs of our local pastors. Unfortunately, the proposed pastors' care committee did not work quite well due to the same reason: the inadequacy of the CBMA to manage and sustain the program. Now, given the current ministerial concerns that confront our convention, allow me to make the following recommendations very briefly. First, I would like to suggest that we revisit our idealized and perfectionist definitions of pastoral ministry. Whatever illusions we may have that put pastors in pedestal as if they are superhuman and superheroes, the fact remains that they are humans and are never perfect. And so, while standards for pastoral ministry are maintained to ensure that pastoral integrity is preserved, appropriation of the good news of grace and forgiveness as a daily necessity of the Christian life must never be neglected. Second, I would like to suggest that the pastoral training and spiritual formation program for Bible school and seminary students must be strengthened and should include self-discovery methods and courses on vocation and ministry. I think these are courses which were recently added to the curriculum of our College of Theology here at CPU. And we do that to ensure that our students have fully understood themselves, their calling, and the work they are called to do. To strengthen the spiritual formation program, there is a need for our Bible schools and seminaries to establish an institutionalized partnership with our local churches to encourage them to take part in shaping and molding the lives of our young people for pastoral ministry. And then third, that the CPBC should establish an institutionalized support system for CPBC pastors. A system of supervision and mentoring is employed in most religious organizations in the country and around the world, except perhaps for the Convention of Philippine Baptist Churches. The absence of a strong support system to help and encourage our troubled and wounded pastors in the field makes the situation even more difficult for them to cope. Fourth, our CPBC leadership needs to explore means whereby the economic conditions of our pastors are properly addressed and improved. Resource maximization of camp higher ground and other unused CPBC properties, for example, could be a significant source to augment our pastors' financial needs. And fifth, I strongly recommend that the CPBC leadership must consider the need to create a pastors' placement board manned and administered by at least 5 members of the Board of Trustees and a competent full-time staff who will be responsible for the following responsibilities, as as included in the paper that I have submitted for this roundtable discussion. I don't have the time to go through them. Maybe you just need those items there as printed in the in our guide. Now, do I still have time to? No time anymore. Maybe later on, our president will show you a diagram that will summarize everything that we are planning to do to address our ministerial concerns in the context of CPBC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Narciso. Definitely, we can come back to that later on. And now we'd like to call on Reverend Dr. Elmo Familiaran.
Maayong hapon sa tanan. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Narciso indicated, this is a very dangerous hour. Not only because we have just eaten and the oxygen in our brain has moved to our stomach, it's also siesta time. And for those of us who have come from America barely 48 hours ago, we are 15 hours behind our schedule in our bodies. So, but I think especially for my colleagues from America, I think one of the real gifts of Dr. Narciso is that he is an accomplished singer and guitar player. So if you suddenly hear Dr. Narciso break out into singing, he has seen you napping at your table. Allow me to just take this brief opportunity to once again thank the leadership of CPBC, Reverend Erbilia and staff, the president of the university, President Ted Robles, for the incredible work in making this historic event a possibility. And also to Professor Ruiz for the outstanding work of moderating a room full of Baptists and keeping them on time. That's an incredible accomplishment. And also to my colleagues from the American Baptist Churches USA, who have, especially the executive ministers and the regional executives, our staff from the national office, International Ministries, and Ben Chan, Vicky Goff from the Home Mission Society, for giving their time and talent and treasure in answering the call to participate in this event. I want to thank you deeply for being part of this event. Already, at least for me, in the presentations this morning leading up to now, I have been so grateful that indeed the excellent presentations that have been done so far has answered the work that has gone into identifying the 8 basic topics that we share as fraternal denominations that we face in the future of our ministry, and so far the lectures have addressed that in an excellent way. I am also grateful that Dr. Narciso's presentation laid out the major factors that contribute to the attrition of pastoral leadership, and laid out the rationale for the health of our pastoral leaders. And so in response to his conclusion of suggested recommendations, my hope is that my presentation, which will focus on an actual operational program that is utilized in the American Baptist Churches of New Jersey, will bring into this table an actual solution that we at ABC of New Jersey has attempted to use to address those issues to ensure that our congregations indeed call a healthy and faithful pastor. I think the topic on pastoral placement is somewhat of a misnomer in our Baptist polity, because as Baptists, unlike our connectional sisters and brothers in other communions, Baptists do not place pastors. Although Lee and I have said many times that there are moments that we wish we were bishops, when we can just go into a church and do what we want, or what we at least know is good for the congregation. But I think that my hope is that in my presentation, you will see that what we are instead doing is to come alongside our congregations and provide them the resource that will help them go through a healthy and a faithful process of discernment. So let me first, and you have the full text of my paper in the booklet. So what I will simply do is to offer a summary of that. I want to first give an overview of our process in assisting our congregations in this very, very important task in their spiritual journey. The process that we have in the ABC of New Jersey is a resource that is designed to train and prepare the Pastoral Search Committee in their work. And in that program, the region staff serves as a guide. We are not an employment agency who plays pastors in churches. Rather, the region staff is really providing to the churches the expertise of being a guide in the process. The stages of the process that we use, as explained in the paper, is really an instrument ultimately that is guided by and is shaped by the work of the Holy Spirit. When you look at our handout that I gave to you, you will immediately think that this is a very linear process that just proceeds without any interruption. But the handout I give to you is simply an indication of the progress that we would like to see search committees go through in their process. So let me share some major assumptions behind the process that we are using in coming alongside our local churches in their work of discerning the new pastor. We really believe that, like what you have heard Lee say earlier, that it is the region's obligation and responsibility to, in the context of our Baptist polity, to be a servant to our member congregations, to provide the necessary resources for them to enable them to fulfill God's will in their ministry. That is the starting point of how we on staff see our responsibilities. We are the servant of our member churches, and it is our obligation to protect them and to serve in such a way that lifts up the ministry of Jesus Christ in a healthy and faithful way. And so, another major assumption is that discerning God's call is fundamentally a spiritual journey. And You've heard Lee earlier in his presentation on ordination that we have intentionally grounded even the ordination process in a spirituality. And that has translated also in the way we assist our congregation in their search process, that we have intentionally grounded the process in a spirituality. And hopefully later on I will be able to give you some more details on that. And the reason for that is that discerning God's call really engages us with life's questions of meaning and purpose. What is God calling us to be? And what is God calling us to do? And so the nature of the process of discerning God's call to a church is really a process that needs to change the traditional thinking that the calling of a pastor is merely hiring another employee or reading another job description. Rather, it is above all a journey of discerning God's will in the life of the congregation. Another major assumption is the belief that the nature of discerning God's call to church and pastor is very complex. And it is complex because the goal really of the search process is to find somewhat of a convergence of points of intersection in the two-dimensional part of our being, and that is, one is of the spiritual dimension, and one is the corporate and institutional dimension. And so another aspect of our process includes the essential components of the search and call process. The first component is the spiritual component, which includes the discernment retreat, which I will say more about at the end. And the other major component is the human resources component. And the examples of what is included in the human resources component is, for example, the American Baptist Personnel System profile. Our denomination is blessed with a national depository of all the profiles of American Baptist pastors. It is an enormous computer brain that stores all the basic credentials of our American Baptist pastors. However, we have experienced in regions that whole apparatus has become inadequate because it's not designed to give us a very updated information about the status of a pastor. The information stored in the national database is dependent on the pastor itself updating his or her information. And so if unfortunately, a good number of our pastors do not take the initiative of updating their own profile in the national database. And so the traditional system in our denomination, where the region, whenever there is a church that undergoes a search, the traditional process before has been that we run a computer search in the national database, feeding it with some data. Then the computer cranks out the profile of the pastor that ostensibly matches the profile of the church. And then we're supposed to give those profiles to churches. Well, we have found that that is not adequate because many of the information that is cranked out by the national database is even no longer valid. And so what we have done in New Jersey, in response to the reality of our congregations, our response was to build our own database. We built our own database, and we were gifted by one of our staff colleagues, Vern Matson, who you have met when the ABCNJ team here led the Christ Emphasis Week, who is gifted with those technological skills. Built our own database in a period of 1 year. And we have downloaded all of the American Baptist profiles in the national database who have indicated an interest in placement in New Jersey, and then uploaded it to our own database. And once we have done that, we went through each of the profiles and contacted those profiles personally. And that was a tedious process, but that was the goal that we wanted to meet, that whoever is in our regional database is a real live person of flesh and blood. And each of those candidates have been put through a basic vetting system in the region so that we ascertain that the fundamental standards have been met. And then the end of that vetting process is that the region staff ultimately has a personal contact with that candidate, either through online interview or personal interview. So the outcome of that, the net effect of that, is that those American Baptist profiles in the ABCNJ database, it has been vetted by the region staff. So that by the time our churches request us for candidates, by the time we give them American Baptist profiles, they are ready for an interview, because the region has vetted them. And the search committee no longer is left to themselves to contact those profiles. So we have achieved that through hard work, and we still are in the process of making it stronger and stronger. And so the other important piece that we have introduced in our process, in order to live out our commitment to ground the process in an intentional spirituality, is to introduce the discernment retreat. And that discernment retreat was put together so that we can ascertain that the journey of the church in discerning God's will for them really begins at the faithful place, and that is the place of spirituality. Okay, I think I have caused this to go back, so let me. We've been to that. Okay, another component of the human resources, another piece of the human resources component, just as an example, we require a resume for the candidate. The church then uses that to review the candidate together with his or her American Baptist profile. Then the reference report is an important component also of the credential of the candidate. The structured interview process is another piece of the discernment process, and then a criminal and misconduct background check. So, the discernment retreat that I think makes the process at ABCNJ distinct is, again, intentionally designed to make sure that the process begins from a point of spirituality. And the goal of that retreat is also to, after it begins in the spirituality framework, that the process of creating the pastoral call committee comes out of the experience of the retreat. because traditionally our churches select their search committees, and who they put in the search committees have always been an interesting thing to watch. Sometimes the members of the search committee are the biggest givers of the church. They are the most influential people of the church, and no attention is paid to spiritual gifts. Do they have the gifts of discernment that is important in the task? And so the retreat is designed to inspire and encourage committees to select their members based on the spiritual gifts of the committee. So the discernment retreat has a purpose, and its purpose, once again, is to provide an intentional framework based on spirituality, to explore the nature of the divine summons, and you can see that in your handout in the process. Its anticipated outcome, or the outcome that it aims to have, is to provide a resource for our churches to have a positive search outcome. And what is a positive search outcome? A positive search outcome eventuates in finding a pastor whose skills and qualifications, vision for ministry, complement that of the congregation. Its target audience of the discernment retreat. The discernment retreat is designed for the joint members and leadership of the church and officers of the congregation. And our discernment retreat basically requires at least 5 hours. And we usually hold it on a Saturday, where we encourage churches to begin at 8:30 or 9 o'clock and then conclude at lunch. And so I would like now to call on you to look at your handout that you received, because there you will find the outline of our discernment process that we use to guide our churches. What we also do in New Jersey is every year our region conducts what we call an open house for our ordination candidates. Lee had mentioned earlier that we have 90 ordination candidates now in our process. And so once a year, our region holds an open house where we invite these candidates to come. And we provide information and guidance to them. We meet them one-on-one. They sign up and meet the region staff one-on-one, so we can assess their status in the ordination process and guide them and give advice as to how to progress in the ordination process. And so we make not only an intentional effort to assist our churches, we also make an intentional effort to guide and assist our ordination candidates towards placement. The other handout you have on the levels of scrutiny is also one of the resources that we hand out during that annual retreat, where we give them a summary of what we have experienced through the years. Our search committee, the questions that our search committees tend to ask candidates, because we have seen just far too many instances when candidates come to our search committees for an interview and they totally flunk the test because they do not come prepared. And so we feel that it is also our obligation to help those candidates prepare. So we give them these sets of questions that we have gained through experience that search committees ask, so that they will do their own homework. Okay, I will end the presentation there and yield the floor to the group for conversation. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. So with that, We move on to, okay. So we're right on target. We move on to engagements in conversation regarding pastoral placement. Are we all awake? Yeah, yes, Dr.
Let me ask a question before I kick it off and you guys can pick it up. How successful are you? It applies to both of you. You have in your presentation, sir, you have outlined some really interesting realities of actual issues of life. And so does Elmo. How successful are you in your placement in terms of the thriving nature of the pastor in leadership and being a good shepherd?
Well, thank you for raising that question. How successful are you in your pastoral placement? Let me just say this. When I read Elmo's paper a few days ago, I said to myself, oh my, the CPBC has a big homework to do. Now, what you have presented, for example, is a mechanism that is already operational. And here I am presenting a paper that strongly suggests that we need to put up a pastoral placement board to facilitate the call of our pastors, for example. This has been our struggle for so many years now. We have failed to establish a mechanism that would facilitate the call of our pastors and maybe certain procedures and requirements that we need to prepare to see to it that pastors who are being called to serve our churches are properly screened and they meet the requirements, which is primarily based on what the church really needs in a given particular context. I think there's still a lot of work to do insofar as the Convention of Philippine Baptist Churches is concerned, but there has been, in the past, there has been several attempts to address this particular issue. As I have said earlier, this was done in the ministerial level. The CBMA, Convention Baptist Ministerial Association, this is our national organization that seeks to cater to the needs of our pastors. And this was actually initiated by our pastors, but since there is a quick transition in the leadership, and since we don't have a full-time staff that could manage this program, we have found out that we cannot simply sustain the program. And so now we are trying to suggest that the convention itself should take the initiative, to establish this pastoral placement board that would help facilitate the call of our pastors. So with that, from 1 to 10, for example, in a scale 1 to 10, maybe we are just 3 or 2, something like that. Still have a lot of work to do.
So you're saying we're not successful? Is that what you're saying, Dr. Narciso?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we have begun the process. We have begun the process from the ministerial level, but in the convention itself, the CPBC board, during its regular meeting last November, has passed and approved a motion that we will establish this pastoral placement board. And it has already been approved by the Board of Trustees. I hope it will be operational soon.
Okay.
Yes.
Just a quick response to Dr. Chetty, to Sam. But let me begin first by saying that the fairly new process of ABCNJ, which begins with a discernment retreat, was grandfathered into an older system where, again, it was fully dependent on the national database. And so when our process was introduced, part of the work that we faced was in convincing our local churches that this is a better process. So there was a lot of work, a lot of pastoral work that needed to be done to gain the trust of our churches in the process that we are introducing. Having said that, we have the empirical evidence to say that those congregations who have embraced our process, which includes a very intensive regional presence in every step of the way, has resulted in the call of a pastor that has engendered a healthy relationship. I could provide you that data of all of our congregations that have utilized the process and have eventuated in the choice in a very positive outcome.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Steve.
I appreciate, Dr. Mrs. The presentation you made, and particularly the elements of burnout that I think are common.
Can I interrupt? I think we
Microphone.
need to do a little bit of work on that microphone. We're not
Or
getting
speak
the-
closer to it, Steve.
Okay.
Better.
I appreciate the identification of the factors for pastoral burnout and attrition and all that. I know in my 33 years of ministry, I came to ABC from a sister denomination that will remain unnamed, but is south of the border. Anyway, in that denomination, one of the things that they did really well was they really talked to young people and discipled young people into a sense of call. And so when I surrendered to ministry, there was a very clear sense of call that it was a Samuel type experience for me. And so that has sustained me throughout the 33 years of ministry that I've had thus far. It may make 34. So I'm wondering how we, both the Philippine Convention and ABCUSA, how do we help prospective ministers look for and understand that clear sense of call in their lives? I don't know if you have any ideas on that, but I'd be
Yeah.
interested.
I think in my paper, I made the suggestion that when we consider, for example, the spiritual formation of our seminary students, it should not start in the seminary. It should start from the local churches where they come from.
Mhm.
And that's why we need to strengthen and institutionalize the relationship between our Bible schools and seminary and our local churches. You know, some of our local churches, especially city churches, can sometimes be very demanding. They want a high caliber pastor, but they are not willing to invest. No, they don't even pray for their young people who would express their desire to go to the seminary. It happened to me. I come from a church who did not even care when I told our congregation that I was planning to enter the seminary. Nobody even told. The church did not even call my attention, and then prayed for me, or the church is not giving any financial support for my schooling. And when I graduated here at CPU, and if I would fail to go home, and whenever they would invite me to preach there, they would feel very bad about it, and they would say, "Oh, he doesn't care about our church anymore." But you see, I think we need to strengthen this relationship. Spiritual formation should not start in the seminary. It should start from our local churches.
Yeah.
And even after that, I think after graduation, spiritual formation, we would like to introduce apprenticeship program for our young pastors. wherein after graduation, when they are assigned to churches in the field, they will be mentored and supervised by older and experienced pastors in the field. That's our problem. We have not established a strong support system in the field where our young pastors could be, supported, something like that.
But let me just respond to that, Steve, in what we have seen in the region and continue to see. And that is, well, first of all, materials are, and research is abundant out there in our context in America that has identified major causes of attrition in pastors. And in America, it has been found that the attrition rate of pastors, meaning to say, the rate or the period at which they leave ministry, happens within the first 5 years of their first call, of their first placement. And so that is a crisis and a danger that American pastoral leadership is facing. And another sobering finding is that only 10% of us, pastors, will stay in ministry through retirement. Only 10%. And so the factors that you have laid out that contributes to the attrition of pastors is being faced in a similar way in America. And so what we have seen in ABC of New Jersey, and I think it is part because of the intentionality that we place in guiding ordination candidates during the annual open house, when we sit with them one-on-one like they would go to their doctor's office. There are times when we have had to tell candidates, you know, you might need to take some time out and do some of these things. Or I have grown to hear myself more and more now when I talk to in schools and in seminaries. I've heard myself say, if you are not called, don't come. I mean, you know, because the questions I'm hearing from seminarians are really questions that has absolutely nothing to do with what it means to be called to serve in a local church. And so, yeah, we're facing the same reality. And you are right. I think mentoring pastors in their journey of discerning whether the vocation is really for them is so important. And we just have seen that and continue to see it.
Okay, thank you. I see the hand of Reverend Hiko. And our Kasapulanan and church leaders are all pastors, and maybe they have some experience along this line. We'll take Reverend Hiko, and then we will see the pastors outside the outside the circle.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Familiaran and Dr. Narciso, for your presentation. But I would like to focus my question now to Dr. Familiaran. I understand that the process that the American Baptist churches before in terms of pastoral search was different than it is now, because you were saying that you went back, you tried to reassess it, and I understand that this paradigm shift may have been caused by something. I'm not quite sure, but I've read about the phenomenon of dying churches in the U.S. Was this one of the factors that led to this revisiting and a paradigm shift of now what you're doing? And was the grounding of this search on the spiritual component came out as your evaluation after you try to reassess things out in order to strengthen again the roots of the pastoral ministry in your particular area?
I think there are two pieces in the questions of Dr. Hiko. The first one about the phenomenon of dying churches. Well, that whole question takes on a different meaning in America, because the churches are dying in America. Across the board, it's not only American Baptist, but in the whole American culture, unfortunately, is not lending to the growth of the faith in the continent. I would say to my colleagues there, whenever that issue comes up in conversation, I said, you know, Christianity is not the issue, because whenever I go home to the Philippines and worship, whether it's in my Baptist churches or in Catholic churches, the churches are busting at their seams. Even the poorest churches have standing room only in their worship services. So Christianity is alive and well, except in North America. And so, but that's for a different time. I think the impetus that led us and Dr. Spitzer being fully supportive of it is, again, in part because we have seen that the national database system has become inadequate in terms of being a reliable source of adequate information that is needed by our churches about candidates. So what we have done is not to throw it out, but rather we put some oxygen into it and gave it steroids. When we created our own database, we used the same data that is there, but we then updated each of the candidates that we have received and made sure that they have been updated. Yes, and Lee, why don't you speak to that as well?
Let me quickly answer that question. There were a couple of things we saw. One, we saw churches were waiting too long to find their next pastor.
Yeah.
That the interim period between pastors was growing to an average of 2 to 3 years. And that was hurting the health and ministry of the churches. Second, the search committees were becoming frustrated. They weren't getting, there was so much bureaucratic stuff put in front of them that they were rejecting candidates before they ever got a chance to meet them based on paper, these computer profiles. Our system totally upends that process. They don't see the paper until they meet the candidate. So if they're going to say no to a candidate, it's after they've had a 20-minute interview with the person, not just reading a resume or a profile. Because we believe that the connection between church and pastor is personal. It's interrelational. So we've taken a system that was bureaucratic and organizational. We've thrown away all the upfront organizational work. We do it for the church, so they don't have to. And we immediately get them into meeting pastors, so that within 2 months, they can say to their church, we're already interviewing. And some of our churches have found pastors within just 4 to 6 months, quality candidates, because the busy work is gone. And right away, as soon as they have their profile, their church presentation, which we've simplified, they can start interviewing real people. And church search committees love interviewing pastors. And in 20 minutes, most pastors reveal whether they're competent or not. And the search committees can easily discern who they want to talk to more in depth. Paper confuses. Real conversation clarifies. And that's the heart of our proposal.
Okay, thank you. I recognize Bishop Jesse Magno.
Hello, good afternoon. My concern is to address this to our Filipino colleague, Dr. Narciso. Your recommendations are really commendable. In fact, despite that they are new things, They are very timely and would be very good guidelines in the near future, especially on number 5 and number 6. Since you have mentioned on the camp higher ground and other properties of the convention, do you mean that the CPBC would engage in business in order to supply the needs of the pastors, especially on their salaries or financial needs? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that question. Yeah, I think that is one very important concern that our Property and Resource Generation Committee at the convention should seriously talk about. In the past, there had been a lot of proposals forwarded on the need to improve Camp Higher Ground and some other unutilized properties of our convention. Unfortunately, many of those proposals were only good on papers. To come up with a proposal and to implement the proposal are two different things. And so I think that's one thing that the leadership of our convention will continue to discuss in the next few months. And we have already composed a new committee that would spearhead initiatives to address the financial side of our convention. We have here Dr. Juanito Acanto, for example, and he has come up with a very good, commendable proposal on how to maximize our resources in the convention. I strongly suggest that we read his proposal, and in fact, in the next few days, I think the members of the Resource Generation Committee of our CPBC will have a meeting with Dr. Acanto. We are very optimistic that in the next few months we would be able to come up with something concrete, something that is workable.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Narciso. This particular question, we don't want to dismiss the question, but it is something that is still in the continuing conversation in terms of the CPBC leadership. So it's an internal problem, not a problem, internal challenge, and therefore that will be addressed in a different venue. Okay, still outside the circle. Now, outside doesn't mean exclusion. I saw some hands up there. Our pastors who want to say something about the issues that have been raised for now. Okay, just a minute. Let's see. Okay, you're not pastor, are you? You're not reverend either. What are you? Okay, Sir Larry, please.
Good afternoon. I'm happy that I'm also inclusive to this kind of engagement. I would like first to express my observation. The two presentation presented to us are very, of course, has its own uniqueness. However, I would like to elucidate further the last presentation given by Dr. Familiaran, which I feel very important. And I'm concerned about the back home application for us Convention Philippine Baptist Churches here in the Philippines. Because as what our process in terms of calling the pastor, it seems that I am observing that this is what we call parang sa Bisaya, parang palagpat. Parang palagpat, meaning to say we have no concrete guidelines, so to speak, with regards to calling our pastors. So we always based on the principles of local autonomy. But even local autonomy has many meanings, different paradigms, so to speak also. Now, is it possible that this the new paradigm that I have heard will be also adapted in our convention, and to give a serious engagement on this, to adapt the same and with proper technical assistance coming from our personnel, coming from American, of course, American personnel like Dr. Pamilyaran, to really reconsider this discernment model. Discernment model that, as what we have said, that before ordination is a communal accountability, and right now when we speak again another point of view of calling our pastors, this is also communal, to me, communal accountability, because the failure of one pastor in a particular church without giving more emphasis on the recruitment process, and here comes now one pastor coming in that particular community, and here comes now the failure, the whole society, or the whole congregation and even the society is being witness or are being witness to how the kingdom of God maligned to that particular pastor. So is it possible that this paradigm, this discernment model will be adapted to the convention with your personal or even organizational concern to help our convention of Living Baptist churches? Why I raising this? Because I am also pastor, president of Antique Saplano Baptist churches for so long, and this is our prevailing predicaments.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. You're going to respond, Dr. Pamilyaran?
Very quickly.
Yes, please.
First of all, I am so grateful that today we finally got to meet the leaders of the various Kasapulanans in the convention, because you really are the underpinning of this roundtable. And so to address Pastor Lazaro from the Antique Kasapulanan, I would underscore the word adapted. You will be, in your own context, the best teachers to this reality. So I would only suggest that, for example, in the context of the convention and its own unique realities, I see the possibility of CPBC and the Convention Baptist Ministers Association coming together to design a training module for our Kasapulanan leaders, because they are the closest entities to our local churches, to train the Kasapulanan leaders in a contextualized form of this resource so that they can provide it to the churches in their various Kasapulanan. So that would be my response to it.
Okay, thank you. We have 10 minutes. Dr. Colley, please.
I just want to offer an encouragement or a rescue to the reply of Dr. Narciso, whether we have succeeded in our placement program. It sounded pathetic, but I believe that we are not a total failure on this. My point here is there are two things that I'd like to drive out. First is the channeling of the call for a pastor. It seems that our local churches do not know where to channel the request for a pastor. Another thing is the role of our seminary and Bible colleges. Let me tell you from my own personal experience, I've been in ministry for 34 years, and half of that was spent in theological education. I'm acting as president and dean of the college, but I always make sure that before graduation, our candidates are placed, meaning they know where to go after graduation. Just like last year, we have 20 plus graduates, and before their graduation, I asked how many of them have no placement or no church to work on. And I was surprised that almost all of them have churches already. Now what I do is I go to conferences and promote to the churches that these are the number of students who will soon graduate. And if they are available, if you want to call them, please channel your call to me, and we will send a response to you and match whether this pastor is qualified, And sometimes I don't even do that. They have their own initiative, meaning to say their students themselves are looking, asking their friends where they could work as pastors. So my role is not only to look for money to our Bible school, offer scholarships, administer the college, but also to place our graduates before or after graduation. And I think it helps a lot, our convention. Maybe this was not recognized, but I always do that. I spent 17 years in theological education, but I don't have a problem. Maybe one or two among our graduates are waiting, but most of them, majority of them, after graduation, they have place to go. They have place to go. And so my question is, what is the role of the seminary people, the dean, in placing these pastors? Because, you know, some local churches would immediately direct the request to the Bible school or seminary. And I feel that it's incumbent upon the president or dean of the college to make sure that these students are placed after graduation. Another problem that I found to be defective is with regards to the call of our churches for pastors. I know of one church in Bacolod, for example. They would like to call for a pastor for 6 months. Testing period, 1 year, and so you place them after 5.5 months. They would come to me, Pastor, we will not renew the call of this pastor. And this adds to the problem of placing our pastors because of the shortness of the tenure of our pastors. I think this is something that probably we have to address among ourselves as convention. Educating our local churches on how to call pastors, including the tenure, how many years. Because it's very difficult to place pastors, you know, with 6 months probation or 1 year. It's just adjustment period. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have time for one more response. Dr. Diel. Yes, Dr. Diel, please.
There is a Baptist group in the Philippines that has introduced bishops, but the convention has not done that yet. So,
But that is a hope.
yeah, I am not quite sure whether he will become bishop. Okay, but that is beside the point. I observed in the two presentations two differences. First, the time. One has already presented something which is behind and forward looking because it has already planned things concrete. Database, which the convention has been struggling until now, has not succeeded. Discernment retreat and the search committee. I heard about missing call. There is no organized way of calling pastors in the convention. And here you have in the presentation from our brethren from the United States that there is a search committee which is organized, and probably it is good to ask whether this is regional based or local based. That is, but that can be answered. The common convergence which I saw, aside from the time element, is of course the financial. No, there seems to be a problem there of finance among pastors who would like to get as much for decent living in their family in the United States as well as in the Philippines. That is a common denominator. Okay, so that is a problem which probably each group can address itself. I don't think this historic event can help in providing Filipino pastors from the American group now subsidy. I don't think Dr. Chan will be in favor with that. I am not quite sure about that.
But anyway, that is not the point. So there is the question therefore of looking at the difference, historical difference here, and making it realistic in our own way. I would like to ask, because Dr. Spitzer also mentioned this morning regarding the calling. I would like to follow that up in relation to the placement. In the discernment retreat, how do we determine that that is God's call and therefore can be recommended to the congregations that would like? Because it was also mentioned the call can also be among lawyers, among other people, among other professions. That is also a call. But to differentiate the divine call, which is pastoral, in the discernment retreat, how do we do? Can you help us in this one? Because here in the call, it is individual. Every local congregation has its own way of calling and of outlining the guidelines how to call a pastor. Okay, I think that is enough. Thank you very much.
Okay, do we want a response now? Or can we break for now and then maybe we'll try to find some time to answer that question? Anyone who, what is the pleasure of the body? Just break for a while or hear a response from the... Okay, is anyone ready to respond to that question? How do you discern the divine call?
Well, Dr. Deal's question is a very important question. But I need to say that the discernment retreat that I presented in the instrument that ABC of New Jersey is using is designed for the training and preparation of search committees in our churches. They're designed for search committees to make sure that they are prepared in the most adequate and healthy way in that task. In terms of how we guide pastoral candidates in the discernment of their call, what we do our very best, as I indicated earlier, during the ordination process of the candidates that are in our system. So we continue to mentor them, to serve as their guide as they move through the ordination process, to ascertain and make sure that their call to ministry is fundamental to the journey. That while all the other aspects of preparation for pastoral leadership are important, it all begins in a clear, remembered moment when God visited them in the night and called them for ministry. Because if pastoral ordination candidates cannot even articulate a clear sense of call, then we need to re-examine their journey with them. That's why an essential part of ordination candidates, when they meet the ordination professional ministries committee of ABC of New Jersey, is they are asked first and foremost before they start anything, tell us how God called you to ministry. So call is very important in our responsibility of guiding and walking alongside our candidates for pastoral leadership.
Okay, thank you. But the call for now is for us to break and have our snacks so that we can come back. And we'll try to really find some time to continue the conversation on this level. Is that good enough? Okay, thank you.